Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I'm Cedric Suzman, Vice President and Director of Programming of the Southern Center for International Studies. We're delighted to have you here this morning. I'm also delighted to welcome a number of our trustees that have turned out bright and early. It's quite an honor, and we have Gail Sermershine, we have R.K. Siegel and his wife, Dr. Sue Siegel, and their daughter, Tashi, where are you? A former intern of the center, and Judge Dorothy Beasley, who's, I think, yes, there you are, hiding, thank you. So thank you all for being here to welcome His Excellency Ambassador Ronen Sen of India, a most distinguished diplomat. And before I introduce him, just a brief commercial. We will be doing a program on Iran on the evening of June 21st, a Thursday evening. I think it is Thursday, is it? But it's the 21st, and that should be very interesting. We're partnering with the Cato Institute in Washington, and one of their senior people is coming down, and we have Sandra Mackey from Atlanta as a discussant, and that'll be, I think, very timely program. And we may, in fact, get into some of these nuclear issues since the ambassador has some background in that area. I want to also welcome Consul General Ogawa, Consul General of Japan. Thank you for joining us, as you so often do, and we're really appreciative of your support. Ambassador Sen is one of India's most senior diplomats. He's had the distinction of serving in the United States, of course, where he took up his appointment in August of 2004. But prior to that, also in the United Kingdom and in Russia. He served in Germany as well. He's ambassador to Mexico. He has served his country on numerous commissions and regional groupings on different issues around the subcontinent, as well as on a global basis. It's really a great honor, and he's always seemed to be at the right place at the right time. In Russia, he was there during the collapse of the Soviet Union and saw the change over to Russia. At the same time, in Germany, he was serving at the time of reunification with East Germany, a very tumultuous and great time for that country. He has participated in the non-aligned movement, in the United Nations conferences, in the Commonwealth conferences, and has been the special envoy of the Prime Minister on a number of occasions, and the Prime Minister of India. So I'm not going to go into much more detail, but I do notice, too, that you were Secretary to the Atomic Energy Commission of India, and that is clearly one of the issues that is front and center in our current discussions between the United States and India. But I thought it would be very valuable to hear from the Ambassador what some of the issues are that are concerning him in Washington, D.C. today. So, Mr. Ambassador, Your Excellency, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Suzman, for your kind words of introduction. What I would do, if you agree, is just to make a few observations, and then I look forward to an interactive session with you. As Dr. Suzman pointed out, I've been to different places, and at different times I was there as ambassador in Russia at a time when I was not responsible for the collapse of the Soviet Union. I went there just after that. I was India's first ambassador to the Russian Federation, where I stayed on. Unfortunately, my ambassadorship to China was also announced, but I could not go there because I was at a particular time. It was felt that I should continue in Russia. Somehow or the other, people were under the mistaken impression that I was an expert. So I stayed on there for 6 years. And then in Germany also, it was quite interesting because I was also India's first ambassador in Germany, post-reunification, with Berlin at the capital. So it was interesting. I didn't cause too much of a problem thereafter when I was ambassador or high commissioner in the United Kingdom. There are no major upheavals there. And then across the Atlantic, and here I am. But I would say that we have witnessed remarkable changes in the world in the period after the end of the Cold War, and we have now new opportunities and certainly a lot of new challenges. And today we have the United States as the world's sole superpower. Yet, as we are seeing with the passage of years, even the world's superpower cannot act on its own. It needs partners, friends, to act globally. And I'm glad to say that India is emerging as such a partner. India is changing also, changing rapidly. And we are, I think sometimes in spite of ourselves, maintaining a pretty healthy growth rate. Last year, our growth, GDP growth was something like 9.4%, and before that it was 9%. So it's. I think we can, without too much problem, maintain this growth rate almost indefinitely, and hopefully we should be able to increase it to a double-digit growth rate. I'll just make a few observations about India-US relations, which is, as I said earlier, being rapidly transformed into a partnership, I would say a strategic partnership. And this is a relationship, I'm confident of its inherent strength and inherent resilience, because it is based on shared values, of course, democracy and the rule of law, and also our being a federal polity and a pluralist society. A pluralist society which by its very existence refutes the inevitability of Huntington's thesis of the clash of civilizations. This is a relationship where we can, without going into too much of contortions, reconcile principle and practice, ideals and interests. It's also a relationship which is not transitory, based on transitory or tactical considerations, but based on more durable, long-term and strategic interests and the convergence of these interests. India is growing, but there's another factor which I just referred to just in passing, is that our growth is not destabilizing or threatening, because our growth is not going to be led by exports. Our growth, economic growth, is going to be led by domestic demand, a surge in domestic demand. And finally, there's another aspect which makes the relationship between India and the United States durable and resilient, is that it is of mutual benefit. That is a relationship which benefits the United States as much as it benefits India. And to just give you an idea of some developments which have taken place recently, and here I'd focus primarily on economic issues, not exclusively, but primarily on economic issues. To give you a sense, a feel and a flavor of this multifaceted relationship. Our trade is growing, and roughly trade in goods is 2:1 in favor of India. But it has been my endeavor to focus on increased exports from the United States. Of course, I try to promote Indian exports to the United States, but I focus equally and sometimes more on increasing US exports to India. And I'm glad that our exports, U.S. exports to India are growing faster than India's exports to the United States. For instance, the year before last, our exports to the United States grew by 16%, which is a good, healthy growth. But U.S. exports to India grew by 26%. Not the year before last, this is the last year. Last year, the U.S. exports to India grew by more than 30%, which is the highest growth rate of U.S. exports to any other country. And the first quarter of this fiscal, when I talk about the fiscal, I'm talking of, because our fiscal year ends in the end of March. So the first quarter, our India's exports grew by 10.7%, but U.S. exports to India grew by 36%. I just mentioned some of these figures just to give you a sense of that it's flowing in both directions. The same is happening in the field of investments. It's also in both directions. And last year was the first year, in fact, where not just the United States, but it was the first in two respects. Firstly, the foreign direct investment in India exceeded foreign institutional investment. And also it was first last year that you had inward FDI, foreign direct investment, was exceeded by far by Indian investments overseas. And that is going to be a trend for the future. It'll be happening in both directions. Investments, same. It will be in both directions. In fact, I remember when I first landed in the United Kingdom, and one of the first speeches I made, I referred to I said that in the not too distant future, we'll have a situation where Indian investments in Britain will be equal to British investments in India. And there was a bit of a titter. This somewhat eccentric person has descended on us. That's the general feeling. But now, in fact, I was underestimating. It's proven that, in fact, our investments in Britain are far exceeding British investments in India. But also, you find that we are collaborating in other areas. In science and technology, we were grappling with an agreement. For years, it was being discussed for about a decade. We concluded that quickly. And that agreement was important because it contained clauses on intellectual property rights protection, which was of interest not only it was not just to the two governments, but it was even more of interest to the private sector in both our countries. We have energized and revitalized the functioning of what we call a high technology cooperation group, which is right now focusing, apart from information and communication technology, is focusing on biotechnology, nanotechnology, and recently on defense technologies. Talking of defense, it's exactly 2 years that we concluded a 10-year framework of within which our defense cooperation between India and the United States is it gives a perspective, a longer-term perspective of this relationship. And just last week that we had a very successful meeting of the defense procurement and production group. This is a relationship which is also growing, and it shows this aspect of our relationships shows great promise for the future. We launched an economic dialogue between the President's principal economic advisor and the Prime Minister's main economic advisor, who happens to be the Deputy Chairman of our Planning Commission. and that led to the forming of the CEOs Forum. That is, we have senior CEOs, not too many of them, between about 10 to 12 on each side, and headed on our side by Ratan Tata, who is a respected industrialist, and on the American side by Bill Harrison of JP Morgan Chase. And it has, apart from JP Morgan in financial services, it has, for instance, Chuck Prince of Citigroup, and you have in agriculture, CEO of Cargill, and chemicals, you have the CEO, Chairman CEO of Dow Chemical. So they're serious people, and they provide some very valuable inputs. And this also was set up just a little less than a couple of years ago. And their recommendations have been taken very seriously. And in fact, not so long ago, these recommendations were reviewed once again by the India's finance minister and the U.S. Treasury Secretary, India's Commerce Minister, and Secretary Guterres, and by the U.S. Trade Representative, and of course the principal economic advisors to the Prime Minister of India and the President of the United States. We have launched an energy dialogue. We just heard Dr. Suzman speaking about nuclear energy, civil nuclear energy. Certainly we can discuss that subject. But apart from civil nuclear energy, we have to diversify. India is one of India's biggest problems. I think, in fact, our biggest problem in this century is going to center around energy. Energy and the related issue of water are going to be the big problems for us. And here it's not just civil nuclear energy, but we have to diversify our portfolio in terms of even in fossil fuels, as well as work in areas to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels. So we are working together on civil, just hope to get started on cooperation civil nuclear energy. But apart from that, traditional areas like oil and gas, coal, clean coal technologies. We have recently joined the Future Gen program, which is, as you know, it's $1 billion project for zero emission coal power generation. Then electric power generation, energy efficiency, and of course, new and renewable energy. We have, among several initiatives, we've launched a knowledge initiative on agriculture, and where we focus not only on education and training, but food processing, use of byproducts, biotechnology, water management, and related areas. And here again, like many of these other initiatives, where we take an initiative, it's not just on paper, but we have backed up this agriculture initiative with an allocation of $100 million for 3 years. And it's working well. Apart from this, there have been several other initiatives. I wouldn't like to catalog them, but since I'm in Atlanta, I would like to mention, for instance, we signed an Open Skies agreement, and thereafter, very quickly, this was followed up by 3 airlines based in the United States commencing direct flights to India. You had Atlanta-based Delta, which has commenced its direct flights, non-stop flights. No, I won't say direct flights, non-stop flights to India. Delta commenced flights. Dallas-based American Airlines commenced direct flights to India, and Houston-based Continental. And we'll see several more. In fact, I hope that during my term over here, and not just hope, I'm absolutely confident, this is one of my targets, to double the number of flights. And I think this target will well be exceeded. And apart from that, and this is what I've just mentioned to you so far, they are just some of the highlights of what's happened in the last 2 years. Several other things, several other developments are taking place. I won't like to go into detail. For instance, I'm in an institution where research is done. I would like to say, let's say, for instance, in the field of education, in the last 2 years, we've had a quadrupling of visits by presidents and chancellors of universities and a lot of programs they're working out directly with the counterparts in India. And finally, so this is a relationship which I was illustrating by references in a rather disjointed manner to different forms of cooperation. But I would also like to say, so I was trying to illustrate that it's of mutual benefit. But I would like also point out that the growing partnership between India and the United States is also having its impact in the global context. One is, as I referred to right in the beginning, shared values. Above all, the value, I mean, we are both democracies. But we have not been content with that. We have taken a joint initiative in establishing what's known as the Democracy Fund in the United Nations. And it was quite natural, in fact, that this fund was launched by the President of the United States and the Prime Minister of India jointly in the presence of heads of state and government of old democracies as well as the new democracies in transition at the United Nations. And there again, like with any other initiative, we put on a small amount of money. We put in about $10 million each, which we have doubled now recently to $20 million to get this process started and to help build institutions of democracy, which incidentally, I mean, a lot of people think elections are the be-all and end of all of democracy. We know better. They're just one part of it. But that is work in progress. I refer to the challenges in the post-Cold War period. The biggest challenges, of course, relate to international terrorism and proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. And the worst-case nightmare for both our countries is a combination of the two. We cooperated very closely during the tsunami. But we didn't rest on our laurels. But we had immediately thereafter launched an India-US disaster response initiative, and that's working well, and I think the results will be shortly evident. We have also taken several other initiatives to make the world a better place. Like we have taken, for instance, an initiative, India-US initiative on HIV, AIDS. We are working together on avian flu. I was recently, yesterday, I spent a fascinating time at the CDS, Atlanta-based CDS, where some outstanding people are doing remarkable work. We are cooperating very closely with the CDS. The same with the environment. We are working closely with the United States and including and in hoping to realize the latest initiative which was just announced by President Bush. Multilateral trade is another area where we are cooperating very closely together in the Doha round. And as you know, that there's a group of countries of which India and the United States are in that group. And we are, for instance, co-chairing with the United States the subgroup on services. But it's broader than that. And we have established recently, not too long ago, again, all this happened all that I'm mentioning happened in the last 2 years. We have established a trade policy forum, which is the third such forum which the United States has, the other two being with the European Union and one with China. So this trade policy forum is also working quite well, and it has recently been decided to set up a private sector advisory group to this forum, and which has been set up, and it augurs well for the future. So I end my initial observations, and I would very much like to benefit from your comments, your observations, and of course, if there are any issues on which I can offer clarification, I would be most glad to do so. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Your Excellency, before I open it to the floor, I would like to ask whether you could comment on the current status of the discussions around the nuclear issue that is going through Congress, or not through. It seems to be, I won't say stuck, but it's there. There's some very serious issues. I think given the fact that non-proliferation and the of nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction is so high on the world agenda and on yours and on your countries, I'd like to get your views on where that is heading and whether, in fact, there is an ability, room for negotiation and compromise between India's freedom to continue its nuclear efforts in the weapons area, not only in the domestic area, and whether the United States can accept that.
It has accepted that, actually.
Yes.
And that what has, I'd just like to say that what we are, I wouldn't like to go into the details of negotiations because obviously, I mean, it's something which is an ongoing process. But what happened in July of 2005 and March 2006 was during two summit-level meetings, we reached understanding, we reached agreement on cooperation on civil nuclear energy, which is not just bilateral cooperation, but it envisaged multilateral cooperation between India and the United States, and also India and the world, you might say, as primarily with the countries which are members of the nuclear supply group. The present status is, and that agreement, without going into details, was that India would separate its civil nuclear program from its military program. So obviously the military program was recognized that it will continue, and that's our prerogative, and it's not going to be affected at all by this. It has been outside the purview of this agreement, and that's why we call it an agreement on civil nuclear cooperation. And this envisaged cooperation in the civil nuclear cooperation, that is all aspects of civil nuclear energy. And the second aspect was, of course, what we have actually done, and it's not new, is that our non-proliferation credentials have been impeccable, and I would say without any false sense of modesty, that in many senses it has been far superior to that followed by many who are currently members of the NPT. And we have also, I would say, it's not just a question of ideals or what we have believed in, and we learned quite fast that that this is fairly poisonous stuff, because a lot of people forget that India was the first country in Asia to set up a reactor on its own. So we got to know quite early that this was pretty poisonous stuff. And we took the lead, including the lead in, we are one of the first countries in the world to suggest a non-proliferation treaty, the first country in the world to suggest, to propose a test ban, and a number of other initiatives we are taking. So it is not and we are not talking in terms of just on principles or ideals, because we knew what we are talking about. So, and also, if you look at our immediate periphery, we are not, you will understand that why it's a national security imperative for India to prevent the further proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, because we are located next to the biggest origins and destinations of such proliferation. The negotiations are ongoing, and I would like to say that what we have to do is we have to conclude the following stages. One is we have to negotiate, and which we are doing right now, a bilateral agreement between India and the United States, which will, in a legal document, encapsulate the political level understandings which were arrived at in July 2005 and March 2006. That agreement will then again have to be sent to the US Congress. Of course, the Parliament of India will also, I'm sure, debate it, undoubtedly. There, it's not, that process will not involve any amendments. It's a question of just an up and down vote. So that's number one. Second, we are pursuing a parallel track of negotiations with the International Atomic Energy Agency. And we have to establish an India IAEA, that is International Atomic Energy Commission, agency, safeguards agreement on the facilities which have been declared as civilian facilities by India. The third track would be to have the Nuclear Suppliers Group change its guidelines, or rather, not to change its guidelines, but to exempt India from the application of the guidelines. So all these are steps are envisaged in the coming months, and I hope that all this process will be completed by early next year. Thank you.
Well, in the United States, within the last week, for instance, I came across a woman who was 42 years old and was told by her doctor she had cancer, that she had to bring money, otherwise she wouldn't be operated on. And in India, you have some very economically efficient ways of providing health care, much less expensive than we do here, which many Americans can benefit from, and some have already started to benefit. On the other side of the coin, you have obviously tremendous human suffering from people at the lowest socioeconomic levels in India. And we have tremendous philanthropic organizations which go throughout the world as India does in certain respects, but the United States does. And I'm just wondering if the governments are focusing on how they can collaborate on decreasing human suffering in both countries.
Yes, actually, that's primarily what we're trying to do. And in fact, that's what I regard as my primary task, is to try to make a difference with in terms of whatever we are doing and whatever I try to describe, our ongoing cooperation. If it doesn't affect Average citizen in either country, it's not of much use anyway. And that's what we're trying to do. For instance, when I spoke of biotechnology, that can make a huge difference, both in terms of health, public health, and in terms of nutrition, in terms of food security, and even our cooperation in space can make a difference. For instance, what we do in India is, we have apply very high technology for meeting very basic requirements. We have certain applications, for instance, in space. When you hear about space, you immediately think of missiles and all that. But if you look at the applications in India, they have been of a nature which had not been envisaged anywhere in the West. I'll give you some examples. I referred to our problems with water, which is going to be a huge, huge problem for India in this century. But through satellite mapping, resource mapping, we have been able to make a difference in terms of seeing the groundwater levels. And you have many parts of India where a big chunks of India, I think in most parts of India, you find the men are pretty lazy. And it's the women who do a lot of the hard work. And including carrying water on the heads very gracefully. Now they're walking a little less, so it's making a difference. Instead of walking, let's say, 1,000 yards, some places they were walking 200 yards. That's progress. Or you see an illiterate fisherman can access the latest meteorological data just before going out to fish early morning. Very soon, they'll know where to go to fish. I think that we'll have in place in about a year and a half. Or you might find an old woman in a village, even an illiterate woman, dependent on, let's say, 3 cows for her livelihood. One of the cows falls sick. That's 1/3 her livelihood. She'd be able to access telemedicine. So I'm just giving some of these applications. So what we do is, whatever I talked about all this time so far, all these will be quite meaningless unless they impact on the people. And I didn't want to make it very comprehensive, but we have taken several other steps. For instance, we are going to take a US payload, and this is from Johns Hopkins, which will piggyback on our mission to the moon. So we are doing numerous things. I just wanted to give a feel of some of the aspects of the relationship. But the central aspect is what you spoke about, and I thought that is implicit in what I said. That means as democracies, when you talk about economic reforms, when you talk about cooperation of any type, one is, I talked about mutual benefit. Why did I talk about mutual benefit? Because it's the same in human relationship. Relationship between countries are not that different. Because unless even the civil nuclear cooperation, unless it is perceived to be as much in the interest of the United States as it is in the interest of India, it's not going to be durable. Therefore, so it should be seen to be of mutual benefit. And second aspect rather, is that it has to be seen to be benefiting not just a few people in both countries, but benefiting a majority of countries. If you don't meet these 2 criteria, it's not going to last very long. And so I agree with what you said, and we are trying to do that.
I was curious to get your perspective of higher education in India, apart from IITs and IIMs and the central universities. If you have something to say about that?
You could, so the question was regarding the status of higher education in India, and not just the very well-known internationally institutions like IIT, but on a broad basis.
This is one area where we can and should do much, much more. We started off on a low base, very low base. If you take, India at the time of its independence, our literacy rate was extremely low. It was around, it was less than 12%. So we suffered the ravages of colonialism. It was not just famines, like for instance, there's no other instance in history where so many people mobilized, a country which is struggling for its own freedom, sending volunteers. We had the largest number recorded in history of volunteers going to fight in the Second World War against what Mahatma Gandhi described as a bigger threat, that of Nazism. All of them were volunteers. The country was not threatened. In fact, it is quite the other way around. I mean, if you have the colonial power, the imperial power being weakened, it would have been better for us. But people didn't realize how much we suffered in terms of, education, which was one of India's traditional strengths. There were just a few elite were educated during the colonial period. We had famine right in the middle of that, which killed about part of the country where I come from, Bengal. We had the Bengal famine right in the midst of the war. It didn't even make the headlines in any newspaper. And on the most conservative basis, 3 million people died. Today in independent India, if you have one proven starvation death, you will have, the government will be rocked to its foundations. So it's a very different kind of thing. But we started off, a lot of people are not aware, that was the heritage. So we did, and thanks to the vision of Jawaharlal Nehru, who immediately seized upon the idea of a person called Dr. Humayun Kabir, who suggested that independent India should immediately look to its future and set up the Indian Institutes of Technology and many other institutions of higher learning, not just the Indian Institutes of Technology. But there again, it has been restricted to a few people, much more than earlier, maybe 100-fold more than earlier. But we have to today concentrate on much more than we have on primary education, focusing on the education of the girl child. I mean, when I speak of focusing on the education of the girl child, I don't have any ethical or moral principles in mind. I'm being absolutely pragmatic, because it's been proven that a literate mother, in the influence of a literate mother in the family is disproportionate in terms of a dramatic decrease in infant mortality, much better nutrition with much less income, and the overall impact is massive. And let's face it, you have half your human resources basically, which have been not been accessed or taken advantage of. So that is one aspect. Second aspect is where we have to focus on is on making on vocational training. That's not only people going in for studies in liberal arts or engineering or management, but vocational training, with which they can be self-employed or find gainful employment. And these are two areas where we are focusing on, and much remains to be done. And the other related areas are, what you said, what the gentleman pointed out earlier, is on nutrition and primary health care. And again, potable water and just one all-weather road connecting every village to the nearest marketplace. This is where we have to focus on as a government. And even part of the nuclear initiatives, partly due to that, in the sense of if we can get the generation of nuclear power or generation of power in any area, whether it's coal or gas or wind power or what have you, if those investments could be made by the private sector under a strong regulatory system, this would free scarce taxpayers' resources into precisely those areas, which I just referred to. Thank you.
Could you say something, Mr. Ambassador, about the infrastructure of India? Because most businesses' commentaries that you see here focus directly, front and center, on the lack of effective infrastructure, whether it's in power generation or in road. Not so much rail, but that also needs, upgrading. The ports certainly.
Yeah, my remarks about Indian infrastructure is similar to what Mahatma Gandhi said, of course, jokingly, about Western civilization. He was asked, "What do you think about Western civilization?" He said, "I think it's a good idea." We don't have any. I think infrastructure, you look at, it's awful. I mean, you take airports, ports, roads, energy, that's power supply. You look at the rapid urbanization which has taken place in India. We are just not equipped, any aspect. This is, again, an area where we are focusing attention not just on as I was saying, putting in government resources, having investments by the government, for instance, as it is done over here. Your highway system is largely maintained by your taxpayers' money. We don't have that amount. We don't have funds available, really. So what we are doing is trying to encourage A, private sector participation, B, public-private participation. And some areas where, as I said, nobody's going to invest in the private sector, like, in the village, connecting every village to the nearest place.
Maybe,
those are areas, yeah.
Mr. Tata, if he wants to sell enough of his new, I think it's $2,500 cars,
yes,
the new cheapest car in the world, he'll have to have better roads or they'll fall apart.
But it's happening. It's happening.
I would follow up what you said. Mr. Ambassador, I think what you pointed out very ably, you highlight the thing which is happening in India. The world knows that, and you accentuated that in a very nice way. I just want to make a couple of comments, and I think I've seen it for the last 30 years. Atlanta, Georgia, has more Fortune 500 company headquarters than Chicago, than San Francisco, than Los Angeles, than Houston. Many people don't realize that. You can go in 15 block area in Atlanta, you will find the headquarters of Fortune 500 companies over $200 billion. Now, there are 3 companies I know personally, telecommunication, energy, and other I will not mention. They had a very bad time when they set up businesses in India. Somebody should talk to them, say, what are your experiences? And all the names that you mentioned in this high-powered CEOs, there's not a single company you mentioned here. They are all from the Northeast, or Cargill is from Illinois, but not Illinois. But what I'm saying is it's very important that you take on some of the leaderships. And you talk about the word pragmatic. You are very pragmatic. So I'm saying the companies, those who went there 10 years ago, some of my friends in this audience, they know it. They came back in telecommunication, energy, and other area, totally frustrated. We need to talk to them and say what happened. So that's question number one. The other area like South, the banking you talk about, one of the largest bank is in Charlotte. Ken Lewis is the CEO. He should be talked to. So my question is, he mentioned one point, Cedric did. My question is, where do you think, you already answered one of my three questions, the three impediments in the growth of India. You mentioned infrastructure. I can understand it requires money. What are the two other areas you think they are the impediments in the growth of India for us to go forward?
Well, firstly, your question. I heard this time and time again. But when I'd be grateful if you could spell it out. Companies which had a bad experience in India. Okay. No, I'll appreciate it. Because when I was in Germany, for instance, I heard this everywhere. I talked to the main airlines there and said, huge number of problems. And there were problems. But before leaving, I just asked them, I said, look, just tell me something is bothering me for some time. Which is your most profitable route? Or you say route, I think. Which is a bit shuffling around. But then he came to it. He said, it's to India. Same with the bank, the biggest bank there. Of course, there are huge problems. We know that, and we can do several other things. But there again, which was the most profitable branch? Was Singapore? Was it Hong Kong? Where was it? Bombay. That was the answer. So that led me to there was a simple study which was done, and I will encourage that to be done over here. You had a study done by the Federation of Chambers of Commerce and Industry, which just got, no, not FICCI, it was German chamber. The German chamber. German chamber. And no analysis, like, good experience, bad experience. Just figures. Net profitability after taxation. Number of, you said bad experiences. Companies which had to pull out because they found it's not economic. And time taken from initial investment to profitability. We had about 6 such categories, and just figures. No arguments, just figures speaking for themselves. And it was India, China, Indonesia in a study. And you should see the results of the study. And not just big companies. You had the large multinationals, you had the medium-sized companies, what the so-called the middle stand, and you had the small companies. The results surprised me also. I knew profitability will be the highest.
Mr. Besser, you're right. I saw the economic, very close to them, the CEO level. They shared with me from the profit point of view, they were all wonderful models. They were sure they were going to make profit. It was the other frustrations. I don't have to go into that.
I'll be glad to be frustrated in every way if you can tell me how to make a better profit.
Well, sometimes you can put the same energy someplace else, and life is easier. I'd rather make my money there than go through the frustration.
I don't think so. I think people are voting. I think you're a bit out of touch. I think please get in touch, including with companies over here. I'm familiar with a number of CEOs, including UPS and others.
Our case question really leads to mine, and I've been thinking this for some time. When are we going to have an Indian consulate here?
Well, first thing I'd like to say is that we should have more consulates over here, and I'm thinking of, we have just 4, which is very, very small, and a small number. But I'm doing right now reorganization of work, and I'm thinking of setting up 2 additional consulates. But a lot of the work which we are doing right now, I'm thinking of outsourcing, like for instance visas and some of the work. So I hope that within 3 months, I should be able to take a decision, but it won't be immediate, because after the end of the Cold War, we had, for instance, we had the Soviet Union, we had one embassy. But now it became, 15 countries, and then even in the heart of Europe, you have new countries which are emerging, and we are not doing justice to it. The many states over here, which in terms of the potential for cooperation, it's tremendous, and we are just scratching the surface.
Certainly, the Indian community in Georgia and in Atlanta deserves a professional.
Absolutely, but actually, there also, what's happening is that, like for instance, I told you, I did the same wherever I go. I just concentrate on practical issues, like and that is the word has got around. I know, talking of Fortune 500 companies, I know 148 of the chairman CEOs personally, extremely well, regular contact. And not just on general discussions, very specific issues. What are the specific problems they're facing? How do we overcome them? And we work together with them. Sometimes, in fact, I've discouraged expansion, growth unless people are really ready. Because, you can't generalize about India. You have to talk about where you're going, which state, what area. So we're working very closely together. But I find that we can do much more with, people who are, don't have to be in touch with me personally in Washington. I can do that with Fortune 500 or Fortune 1000. But there are several others who are not known today, who will be the big players of tomorrow. And there's fascinating developments, some things which we can work together, to mutual advantage. New breakthroughs in science and technology. I try to visit campuses wherever I can, but how many do I cover? Okay, as I said, in the last 2 years, we have been able to quadruple the number of visits. And it's like each door you open, you get into a new room with new doors and windows of opportunity. And that process is going on. But somehow we are extremely strained. I'll be doing this, I'm doing this exercise right now, and I think it's a very good question. We need people to be physically present to do that. But in terms of the numbers, I'll tell you, when you talk to the Indian Americans, visas, like for instance, the flights have doubled. So just in the last 2 years, the visa volume also has doubled. So, but that's a good thing. Today, 1 out of 15 applications are from, what you call Indian Americans. After 2 years, I think it will be 1 out of 30. But that doesn't mean anything. We have to provide the service and do it on the spot, to the extent possible. Thank you.
The last couple of questions, because we do have to close by 9:15. Yes, the gentleman there and then the lady in front.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. My name is John. I'm an intern at the Southern Center. My observation is that while there's an economic development in India, there's also been a development of HIV and AIDS, which is a huge threat to India, and the stigma that exists toward the people living with HIV among communities is not out of balance. If anything, it's exacerbating the situation. So my question is, what sort of initiatives have been implemented, and do you think should be implemented to fight HIV/AIDS and the stigma?
You're right.
The question was over HIV/AIDS, the seriousness of that epidemic in India and the stigma that it's attached to it still socially.
Yes, that is a problem we face. But initially also I'd say very frankly that not everyone in the government, that is both at the central as well as the state level, was as straightforward as we should have been. But that's been corrected, and now not only people in government, but the Parliament of India, the state legislators, and civil society groups have been extremely active. and you'll find a number of programs, or whether it's on television, which has reached every corner of India. It's a very, very active program. We know about the threat which is posed by this, which can be posed by this problem, and we intend to tackle that with the seriousness that it deserves. Thank you.
Are you manufacturing generic antiretrovirals for
Yes.
your own use as well as for export?
Yes, absolutely. When I talked about, for instance, the India-US cooperation in combating HIV/AIDS, it was not just in India but on a global basis, because 8 out of the 10 drugs she mentioned are manufactured in India. A lot of people are not aware of the fact. I think most people are, but some people are not aware of the fact that you have more FDA-approved companies, pharmaceutical companies in India than in any other country in the world outside the United States. So this initiative is not just one between HIV, in combating HIV/AIDS. It's not just between two governments. It is also a corporate initiative where you have corporate America working together with corporate India, and a number of research institutions, a number of non-governmental institutions. So it's several layers that we are working together. And this is a very, very important threat. Even avian flu, which has not touched India, but if it affects our region, it affects us. Because one is, of course, that we don't want to wait till it comes to India. But also that it affects the economies adversely, and thereby it impacts on us, because we are living in a world which is more and more interdependent. And so there again we have taken a lead, and the first international conference on the avian flu will also be held in India this year. Thank you.
Yeah, last question. Yes.
Hi, I work for an international business publication. I'm interested to know what you think about Georgia's plans to open a representative office in India. How do you think that might change the business relationship between Georgia and India?
I think that we should do more, and that was one of the reasons for my visit. I tried to get out of the Beltway as much as I can, and it's very interesting for me because it's a learning. It improves my knowledge of what happens, and I find that when I talked about our trade growing, by very rapidly, Georgia's exports and imports from India have not been growing. It's growing, but it's growing at a rate which is much lower than the national average for the United States. And I want to see why this is so. We have, and there can be more of trade and investments. Of course, we had the biggest U.S. investment in India has been by the acquisition of an Indian company for about $2 billion, but we recently, one of our companies paid about $6 billion cash for acquiring Novalis. But we can have much more of that, and so I'm in touch with a number of Fortune 500 CEOs who are based in this state, and also I visit some of the institutions, and I think there's great potential. And one of the I was struck by the fact, this very, very brief visit, that how much we can actually do, because people are not aware of the prospects as they exist. Because people sometimes over here also, and it's natural, people don't realize the change of pace which is taking place in India. It's very, very rapid. So you tend to get outdated very fast, and it's like moving on the wrong side of an escalator. Just to keep up with developments takes a lot of effort. And my job is to try to keep people abreast of developments as they are unfolding in India. Thank you.
Well, Your Excellency, thank you. Thank you. you very much indeed. Fortunately, we've run out of time because the next question was going to be over Afghanistan and Iraq, but we'll have to leave that for another time.